Good afternoon. I just wanted to let you know, as you're probably aware, any questions that you want to ask at the end, you can ask them via Slido, and also you can rate the talks there. My name is Marit van Dijk, and I'm here today to talk to you about keeping your dependencies in check. I always start by asking, who uses open source software at work? Which is pretty much everyone, including, well, duh, yes. So open source is everywhere, which is really nice because it offers us functionality without us having to write it ourselves. I'd rather use an existing testing framework or application framework and not have to write all of that myself. But there are downsides. So for every dependency that you declare, you might pull in a bunch of other dependencies. And that leads to bigger binaries with bigger startup times or slower startup times. All of the transitive dependencies that you're pulling in could have potential clashes, which are no fun to solve. And also, there can be vulnerabilities in any of your dependencies, both the ones that you declare and the transitive dependencies. So who remembers what happened last December? If you're a Java developer, you probably know. Some nervous giggles tell me that you remember what happened. So in December last year, a huge vulnerability was found in Log4j, which is a commonly used logging framework. And the severity of that vulnerability was such that we all had to update all of our applications. Anybody else? Updating all of your applications? Twice in my case, because after the first CVE was found or disclosed and fixed, there were several others, so we got to do it again. Fortunately, we had just practiced doing it, so it was a little bit quicker. And then in March, we got to do it again because of Spring for Shell. So we see that using dependencies have pros and cons, so how do we deal with that? Sorry. On the one hand, I've seen teams who are very hesitant to use dependencies because, you know, if you don't have any, they can't be vulnerable either. To the point where instead of using common mocking frameworks like Mockito, they just write their own mocks and write everything themselves. So it ends up being a lot more work in that sense. On the other hand, you shouldn't be just... I've also seen teams who are like, oh, I heard about this new dependency at a conference and we should totally use it because it looks really cool. And then you end up pulling everything in. But then you also have to maintain that. So let's try to find the right balance. There's a reason that the answer to all of the questions is it depends. Of course, the interesting part is what does it depend on? So what are some of the things that we should look at when we are selecting dependencies that we might want to use in our project? The first thing is, does it fit? Does this dependency solve the problem that we have without adding a bunch of new problems for us to solve? Is the size of this dependency somewhat in balance with the size of our problem? I don't want to pull in a huge dependency if it solves only this little problem that I have. Do we have another dependency that already does this thing? So we don't need to, for example, use Jackson and GeeCON. We can pick one and then use that for serialization and deserialization. Another thing to consider is, of course, is the dependency well managed? We can look at the frequency of commits and releases and look at the active number of maintainers and contributors to a project to see. There's an XKCD for everything. This one is very relevant because maintaining open source software can often be a thankless job. Not all users realize that most projects are built and maintained by volunteers in their spare time. And the number of users doesn't always translate into a number of contributors. Which is a whole other problem that I have a whole other talk about. But it is something to consider. Another thing to consider is the community for a particular dependency that you might want to use. Is the community welcoming and helpful if you have questions? One is popularity, of course, because if there are a lot of people using it, that's potentially a lot of people that are writing about it, talking about it, that can help you by answering questions, either in official support channels or on Stack Overflow. But that doesn't help if they are just mean or keep telling you to just read the documentation. So a community that is helpful can be a reason to select one dependency over another. Of course, something to consider is it easy to use? Is it easy to implement? Is it well documented? So you have a place to go on how to find out how to use it. And of course, some of it might be personal. Do you like using it? You might prefer one over the other for many different reasons. Something to consider is as well, how much impact will using this dependency have on my code base? If you use string utils, which is an example that I see a lot, and it's then used for maybe one function, up to max 3 is the maximum number that I've seen it used for. So I already have questions whether you really need it or whether you can just write those functions, especially if you're moving to Kotlin, where the standard library can do that, or you can use extension functions. But if you do want to remove string utils, it's fairly easy to do because it's only limited functions in very specific places. That's not the case if you're, for example, using Lombok or Reactor, because that will infest your entire code base, much like the dandelion will infest your entire yard. Ask me how I know. So if you decide that you do want to use a particular dependency, at least make sure that you're using the latest stable version and that you're not introducing new vulnerabilities, so that the latest stable version doesn't have any known vulnerabilities. So where do we find this information? One place that you can look is Maven repository. I'm going to use Jackson Databind as an example, not to bash it, because we used it a lot at my previous job. But deserialization and serialization is unfortunately an area where lots of vulnerabilities are possible. I'm using it as an example because I know that there are vulnerabilities in this. I'm definitely not bashing the project at all. So here we see that we can find the different versions and when they were released, but also a list of are there known vulnerabilities in a particular version. So if we go to the details of one particular version, we see a box saying there's a newer version of this and a link to the CVE, which will go to more information about that security vulnerability. We can go to GitHub to find information about a project. On GitHub, we can see the number of commits, when the latest commit was done. This screenshot is from Saturday. There might have been a commit since then. We can see the latest release. We can also see the number of watches, stars, and forks, which will give an indication of how popular the project is. Although I tend to also star projects that I'm interested in looking at later, you know, to add to my list of rabbit holes of things that I would like to look at some point. So it doesn't necessarily mean users, but in general will give some idea of how popular a project is. And we can have a look also at issues to see if there are issues open that might relate to functionality that we want to use. But we can also look at issues and pull requests to see how the community interacts with their users. So are they nice if people report issues? Do they provide constructive feedback on pull requests? Do they even respond to pull requests, etc.? And we can look at the Insights tab, where we can see the activity on a project, as well as the contributors and a graph of when contributions were made. JetBrains has created a package search functionality where we have a website that you can go and find some of the similar information. But package search is also integrated in IntelliJ IDEA, so you can also get this information in your IDE if you're using IntelliJ. Just for the record, who's using IntelliJ? Check question, who's not using IntelliJ? Oh, wow. So if you want IntelliJ stickers, I have some stickers. Come find me after. And I'll show you what package search looks like in IntelliJ afterwards, or a little bit later. But if you don't have access to your IDE, you can find the information online as well on the package search website. And as you can see, the information is similar to what you can find on Maven repository and GitHub. It will have the latest release, what license type is used, who are the developers, tags to Stack Overflow, so you can find questions on Stack Overflow for those topics, the website and the source code, as well as on the different tab, on the versions tab, a list of the versions and when they were released. So even if we look carefully at which dependencies we want to use, and hopefully also periodically re-evaluate if we're still happy with the ones we're using, we'll end up having to maintain them. And that takes some effort. It's sometimes hard to sell to the business that you need to spend time on it, although the past year may have helped with that. So let's look at some tools that we can use to make this manageable. And I'm going to go from really basic tools that probably everyone can use to some more complicated that either you might be already using, hopefully, or might want to have a look at for the future. So what I used to do several years ago is to just use Maven. I'm more familiar with Maven than with Gradle, but I'll show some Gradle stuff as well. And you can use Maven to look at your dependency tree, which will give you an overview of the declared dependencies that you have in your POM XML, as well as the transitive dependencies that they pull in. And you can use Maven to ask to display the dependency updates, which will give you an overview of these are the dependencies that have newer versions that you can then apply and see if your build still works, etc. I'm using a really old project for this example. It's a project that I built in 2017 and haven't maintained since, so please don't go look at the code, it's crap. But it's a perfect example for an unmaintained project with lots of old dependencies, so that's what I'm using it for now. Also, you can use Dependency Analyze to see if you have any unused declared dependencies, because those you may want to remove. In this example, JUnit is one of them. It means there are no tests. If you have JUnit and you have no tests, then don't remove JUnit, add some tests. But I have another talk on that as well. So in Gradle, you can also ask for the dependency tree. The command is dependencies, so you get the same declared dependencies and transitive dependencies. If you want to see the dependency updates, you have to import a plugin. One plugin to use is the BenMains plugin. And then you can also ask for dependency updates. This example is the Spring Pet Clinic project, because that had Gradle in there. Finally, you can use IntelliJ. If you open your POM XML or your build Gradle, which I'll show you in a second, and this works in both community, so the free edition, and in Ultimate, so the paid version, you can see under the version that there's the little squiggly, which means that if you Alt-Enter, and that works both on Mac and Windows, then you will get a suggestion to update this version. And that works also in Gradle, the squigglies and the suggestion. You also, if you have at least one supported module, and I think Gradle, Maven and SBT for Scala are supported, you will have a dependencies tab, and in the dependencies tab, you can also manage your dependencies. So I don't know if this is readable for you all in the back. Yes, no, maybe, I see yes. Thank you. Okay, so in this project, these are the dependencies that I have. We can set the scope, so most of it is set to default, but you can also change that if you want. You can change the version that you're using. Of course, like I said, this example, they're all outdated, so we can update them. We can also search right here if we want to add dependencies, as you can see right here, and you see on all the way on that side, you see the dependency details pane, which provides all of the information that we also saw on the package search website. So you have all of that information in your IDE. You don't have to go anywhere else. And in the Ultimate Edition, we also have the package checker, which is one of my favorite new features, or at least it was new to me. So that means that if you have a dependency that is vulnerable, it will be highlighted in yellow, as you can see here. And the hint will show links to the vulnerabilities that are found in this particular dependency. That's a partnership with Checkmarks, a security company, and the links will go to their database to show you the information on those vulnerabilities. So this is really useful. It will tell you right away, hey, you're using one that's vulnerable, please don't. So the downsides of all of the things that I just showed you is that in order to apply them, I have to have the project checked out and see what the dependencies are that are being used. And if I find any that are vulnerable, I have to go and apply those and see if the build still passes, etc. Another tools or set of tools that you can use is software composition analysis. There are lots and lots of different tools for this. And what they can do is they can scan all of the repositories in your company, and hopefully also the containers or the base containers that you're using, and create overviews of which repositories are vulnerable, what vulnerabilities are in there, what their severity is, etc. I was working at bol.com until recently, which is an online retailer in the Netherlands. And we had internal tooling on top of such a scanning tool that would give each team an overview of here are your repositories, whether they contained any vulnerabilities, and then you could drill down on the details. So I hope that whatever companies you are working for, you have something similar. If not, maybe ask your security department about it. The pros of having such a tool is that you don't have to check out each individual repository and scan it yourself, but the downside is you do have to go to the dashboard to see, do my repositories and my container images have any vulnerabilities, and then you have to go check them out and fix it. So the next set of tools that you can use are bots. On the JVM, we have 3 options that support Java and JVM languages: Dependabot, Renovate, and Sneak Open Source. And I want to show you a little bit the differences of each of those. So Dependabot is GitHub native, which means that it's really easy to install if you're on GitHub. And it includes 3 options. It includes Dependabot alerts, so just to get an alert if there's a vulnerability. Security updates, so PRs that are generated to update versions if they contain known vulnerabilities. And version updates, so updates just if there's a new version, but not for security reasons. Because it's GitHub native, you can enable it in your settings under code security and analysis. And you can enable either the alerts or the security updates here. If you enable the alerts, you'll get this message on your repository if it contains vulnerable dependencies. And if you click the button, you will get the list of the vulnerable dependencies. If you enable the security updates, it will create PRs to your repository to update them. And you can communicate with the bot by telling it to merge or rebase or close or ignore or reopen the PR. You can also add version updates. To do that, you need to add a YAML file. This is my semi-regular reminder that YAML sounds like the Dutch word jammer, which means too bad or unfortunate, which is always funny. So you add a Dependabot YAML. This also impacts the security updates, so it configures the version and security updates. You need to provide which package manager you're using and where to find the manifest file. You can set the frequency to daily, weekly, or monthly. You can set the schedule on when it should run. You can configure the maximum number of PRs. It will default to 5, but you can change that if you want. And it will allow you to configure some details to manage the PRs, like who to assign it to, whether there should be reviewers, what the commit message should look like, bless you, labels to add, things like that. The next option is Renovate by Mend. This is also available on GitHub, but via a GitHub app. So if you go to this URL, you can configure it there. I will share a link to the slides at the end, by the way. When you click Configure, you get the option to choose between applying it to all of your repositories or selected repositories only. Renovate is the only one of the 3 bots that we're looking at that offers the option to go to specific repositories or to apply it to specific repositories. So if you want to just try out a bot, this would be a good one to try. It will then create a PR to add the configuration to your repository. So it will add the configuration file. And once you merge that, it will start running. It has a bit more configuration options than Dependabot. You can, like I said, apply it to all your repositories or selected repositories only. The configuration file is created for you. You can set a maximum number of PRs, but you can also set a maximum number of concurrent branches. You can even set an hourly limit if you don't want to get spammed by too many PRs. And it has the same other options that Dependabot had about assignees, reviewers, labels, commit message, but there are more of them, and they're a bit more fine-grained than the ones for Dependabot. The Renovate PR will look something like this, and you see that it has more information than the Dependabot one. It has information about the age of the package. It has information about the adoption rate, which is the percentage of this package users within Renovate that are using this release. It has passing, the percentage of updates which have passing tests for this package, and the confidence level as determined by Renovate, where neutral means that they either don't have enough information or they can't determine based on the information that they do have. They will also add, if you want, a dashboard to your project that has a list of all of the PRs that are open. And the last option is Sneak. Sneak is a security company. They offer several tools. So Sneak open source can help you avoid vulnerable dependencies. Sneak code is a static application security testing, so it can check out your code as it's written for security bugs. Sneak Container can check your base images. Infrastructure as code can fix misconfiguration in the cloud, and Sneak Cloud can help build, deploy, and stay secure. But we're going to look at Sneak open source as one of the bots to keep your dependencies up to date. To enable Sneak, you have to go to their website and click the Start Free to try it out. You can authorize with your GitHub account, and then you can choose between applying it to all of your repos, so public and private repos or public repos only. And they offer several other app options. So they offer the option to create PRs for security vulnerabilities and to create PRs for out-of-date dependencies. But they also offer to test for new vulnerabilities on new PRs, which the other bots don't, and to test for vulnerabilities in your source code. So that's the checkboxes at the bottom. You'll have to create a personal access token to enable Sneak. And if you have Sneak enabled, PRs might look like this. So here also we see a little bit more information than Dependabot. The security level, a priority score as determined by Sneak on what the priority is of doing this update, with the reasoning of why it has this priority, a link to more details about the vulnerability, what the upgrade is and whether it's a breaking change. Something that Sneak also does automatically is bundle PRs. So if there are updates in a certain library or framework that are related, it will bundle them into one PR. And that limits the amount of PRs, so the spam that you get on your repository. I'm told that you can also configure Renovate to do something similar, so it can bundle PRs for certain topics. So the Sneak PR check is really nice because it will check on your incoming PRs so that you're not adding vulnerable dependencies. And they offer a dashboard, although your static composition analysis might offer something similar. So this will show for repositories. And again, these are old repositories that I don't work on from my GitHub graveyard. So they have lots of vulnerable dependencies that will never get updated. And you can also look into your projects and search for projects there. It has less configuration options. You can set the frequency to daily, weekly, or never, although I don't know why you would set it to never. You can enable or disable to look only for new vulnerabilities, so anything that becomes vulnerable after, or for known vulnerabilities if you want to get rid of your backlog. And you can enable or disable PRs for specific projects. So the pros and cons for bots are that they're relatively easy to install. Of course, I looked at GitHub only. If you use a different build server, then it might be more complicated. At bol.com we used GitLab, so there were slightly more steps there, but someone had figured out and documented how to add it to all of our repositories. It still wasn't a lot of work. They will create automatic PRs, so you don't have to go looking for what needs to be updated. It will just tell you. But depending on how out of date you are, that can create a lot of noise. So we had configured it to run once a week, and we would get spammed by sometimes the same PRs if we had closed them earlier. I unfortunately left before we could fine-tune that a little bit. And you'll have to still manage those incoming PRs. So you have to look at, can we merge this? Can we deploy it? If the build is green, okay, it means it still compiles, the tests still pass. But does that mean you can also deploy it to production? You might want to verify at least something, or at least babysit it to production and check that your error log doesn't fill up, or your basic functionality still works in production. So it still does need some of your time and attention. And if the build fails, then all you know is to do this upgrade, I need more work. And that might be fixing tests, but it might also be updating code if there are breaking changes, etc. Fortunately, there are tools that can help you with that too. I'm going to look at some of them. I know that there are more, but I'm just going to show you some that I'm familiar with. First of all, IntelliJ IDEA does have some functionality to migrate packages and classes. So if you still need to migrate Java EE to Jakarta or JUnit 4 to 5, we have migration options for that. We also have videos on our YouTube channel that guide you through those migrations if you still need to do them. Basically, what it does is it will find the classes to replace. So, for example, for JUnit. But there will be other steps that you would need to do yourself. Another tool that isn't technically a migration tool is ErrorProne. It's a static analysis tool for Java that catches common programming mistakes at compile time. It works with Maven, Gradle, and Bazel. It has plugins for IntelliJ and Eclipse, and it also works via the command line. And it has a list of long list of bug patterns that are often found in code and how to fix them. So you can go to their website to see which bug patterns are there. There are literally hundreds. And you can configure it to either report on those bug patterns or to actually fix it. So it will migrate your code from this is a buggy or an anti-pattern and this is what it should be. And you can create custom checks. ErrorProne also includes a tool called Refaster, which is a refactoring tool that can refactor code using a before and after template. So again, if you have a pattern like, instead of this, I want it to be this, you can create those yourselves. I have not used ErrorProne, but another speaker from the Netherlands, Sander Mak, who works at Picnic, he has a talk on ErrorProne where he shows how they use it to help prevent security bugs in their code, as well as how they used it to upgrade Java versions, because you can do the before and after templates, and they were already using the tool. They used it for some migrations as well. I watched this version from JSpring, which is a Dutch Java conference by the Dutch Java user group. He also did a similar talk at DevVox last week, where they announced that they are also open sourcing part of their solution. So they have error-prone support by Picnic, and they add a bunch of bug patterns and refactor rules, so basically migration templates that you can also use. And this is a great place to look if you want to have some idea of what do the bug patterns, and the refactor rules entail. What does that look like? So the last tool I want to show you is OpenRewrite. OpenRewrite is a migration tool. It's a source code refactoring for framework migrations, vulnerability patches, and API migrations. It currently focuses on Java, but they do plan to also include Kotlin, for example. So it works with Maven and Gradle. It has a lot of existing recipes, so migrations from, for example, Java 4 or JUnit 4 to 5, Java 8 to 11, etc. And you can author your own recipes. So they have fairly good documentation. They have a quick start on their website if you want to give it a try. I did that for you already. So you can start by adding the plugin. And if you add the plugin, I'm using Maven because I'm more familiar with Maven, but you can also do the same tutorial with Gradle if you prefer. If you have the plugin installed, you can run the command discover, and that will discover all of the existing recipes and styles. So the recipes are migrations from one framework or one framework version to another, so Spring Boot 1 to 2. And the styles are more formatting styles. In order to use a recipe, you have to configure an active recipe. So in the tutorial, they use the auto format. If you have the active recipe and you run rewrite, it will make changes to your code, so it will reformat your code. You can check out what changes are made either in your Git diff or in your commit tool window, and review the changes and see if you want to accept them. But they also have larger recipes. For example, this Spring Boot 2 JUnit 4 to 5 migration that includes both a Spring Boot upgrade and a JUnit 4 to 5. And you will see that the Spring dependencies are updated, the JUnit 4 dependencies are removed, JUnit 5 are added, and the code is changed where it needs to be. OpenRewrite does not yet support automatic upgrade of Gradle dependencies, so you'll have to do those manually, but it does support them for Maven. A friend of mine, Tim de Beek, did a great talk, or is doing a great talk on migrations made easy. He uses this tool as a consultant to help companies migrate their code. And he goes into way more detail about how it works. And also, I think lots of people are Spring users or Spring Boot users. So there's I don't know if you heard about the Spring Boot Migrator tool, that's experimental. That is also based on OpenRewrite. So I'd recommend checking out Tim's talk, and he has a blog post as well about how they use it. So in summary, I urge you to evaluate and re-evaluate your dependencies frequently and carefully to see whether you want to import them and whether you still want to continue using them, whether they are still supported, for example, to automate checks and updates as much as possible, and to stay safe. Thank you. To see the slides, you can find them here. I'll leave that up a little bit. And if you want to ask questions, we can do so in Slido. And please don't forget to rate my talk. Thank you. Are there any questions on Slido? Okay. Did everybody get it? Okay, let me... Okay. Of course, now I can't read it here anymore. Okay, let's see. What is my experience convincing developers to keep dependencies in check? How do you make them interested in doing it proactively? Good question. Well, I don't like panic-driven development. I like my development to be as boring as possible, please. I don't like being in incident rooms or, you know, having to work late or anything. So that is one way. Of course, some developers do like a little excitement every now and then. So maybe you can't convince them that way. But I do think it's easier. It makes your life easier if you stay somewhat current. Because otherwise you might have to panic update your dependencies, and you might also run into other issues when upgrading. For example, one of the teams I was on at my previous job, we did a migration from Spring to Spring Boot. We also went from Java to Kotlin. And somewhere in that migration, we also found out that some of the libraries we were using didn't work well together. So we had to get rid of one of them, which was something that we had planned anyway, because we wanted to move to a different library that we were using in all of our other repositories. But as you can see, during those upgrades, you might find out that there's more work to be done. And you definitely don't want to find that out if you have to urgently update something because of security vulnerabilities. So yeah, I prefer my code bases somewhat healthy and somewhat maintained because it makes life easier. So one of the things that I would do is, you know, before we had the bots and the scans and everything, was if I was working on a particular repository to do a bug fix or add a feature, is to just run the display dependency updates command to see if there were minor updates that we could do. And then we would do them right after. We had to deploy them anyway. We had to verify that the code still worked. So that makes it somewhat easier to do some cleanup while you're there anyway. So that would be my recommendation. Is Sneak open source or does it have a paid license? So Sneak open source is free to try. I don't think the code is open source in that you can see it and contribute to it. I'm not sure. We can ask Brian Vermeer on Twitter. He's a developer advocate at Sneak. And they do also have paid licenses. So there are companies that use Sneak in a paid license. But I don't work for Sneak, I work for JetBrains. I just have used their tools and wanted to show you the Sneak open source as one of the bots that you can use. Upgrading individual libs might break things when dependencies are maintained by Spring Boot parent POM. Any other than just upgrade SB version. Yes, so if they are maintained by Spring Boot, I would use the version that Spring Boot uses instead of overriding with your own version. Does that answer the question? Is there any portal for Gradle indicating library versions like the one for Maven? So like the Maven repository, not that I'm aware of. But the package search in IntelliJ does work for Gradle like it does for Maven. There are some limitations. You can find them in the documentation for package search. How to best tackle transitive dependencies? In what way? I think it's good to be aware of what you're adding. So not just the thing that you're declaring, but also what it brings in. It helps if you stay on a particular Java version and the libraries that you use are also on that Java version. Hopefully they will play well together. How to resolve clashes. I have no tips. Probably some of you can teach me something, a thing or two on that as well. How quickly are vulnerabilities usually found? How long time should I wait before updating to a newer version? So, it depends. Sorry. How quickly are vulnerabilities found? So, for the Log4Shell, turned out that had been in there for years before it was disclosed. So the whole open source is safer because many eyes? Not necessarily. So how long does it take before it's found? I can't say. It varies. How long should we wait before updating? That's a mix of factors. Of course, how severe the vulnerability is. So how vulnerable are you? Are there known exploits out there? What is the impact if someone were to use that exploit on your company or on your software? Those are reasons that you want to update quickly. But the other one is you might want to wait for something to become stable, if you can. So you might not want to always have the latest versions. Also because there are known cases of supply chain attacks where new versions are released that have malicious code in them. So not accidental vulnerabilities, but on purpose ways to make your software vulnerable. So yeah, take those things into account. What do you think about multi-module applications from the perspective of additional dependencies among modules? I would need some more context for that one. I'll be around here. I'd love to discuss and learn from your context as well, because that's one of my favorite things about going to conferences, meeting people who are doing different types of jobs in different types of businesses, etc. Any package search portal for Eclipse or NetBeans? So yes, you can use the package search website as well to get that same information, or the Maven repository website, or GitHub, or all of the other places that I showed you. I am not an Eclipse or NetBeans user. I haven't used Eclipse in 6 years. So I don't know if they have similar functionality, I'm sorry. Do I know how Sneak decides whether an update is breaking change? No, actually I don't. That's a good question. This is something that you could ask Sneak or, for example, Brian Vermeer. When the blocking operation in the virtual thread finishes, I think that's for someone else. The unused dependencies check option for Gradle. Good question. No, I don't know. As far as I know, there should also be plugins like the one for the dependency updates, but I haven't found a good one yet, or I would have included that. So if you find a good one, please let us know, because I know a friend of mine who's using Gradle is looking for the exact same thing. So, Gradle users? Anyone? Do you know of any? Okay, so it's not me that I couldn't find it. Thank you. So yeah, I think that would be a good add-on to have for Gradle. I think there are plugins available, but I'm not sure. Ideas to convince businesses about updating. That's always hard, isn't it? How to convince the business to let us do maintenance to the code base or refactoring, or yeah, also, again, with the panic-driven development is not good for anyone. And code needs maintenance, just like your car or your home or your, plenty of other real-life examples. If you want to keep using it, you have to keep taking care of it. I was lucky at bol.com that we had product owners who would usually understand that we needed also some time to keep our code bases healthy. Sometimes there are business reasons why we can't do it right now, but hopefully you have a team where you can discuss with your product owner or whoever is in charge of the business decisions and you also have people who can explain it into terms that they can understand. There's a difference between linking a vulnerable dependency and effectively using vulnerable code. How do you analyze and recognize it? So, yeah, that's just because there is a known vulnerability in a dependency doesn't mean that your code is also susceptible to that particular exploit. That's a good question. So usually when new vulnerabilities come out, there will be people who are a special type of nerds who like to find out whether they can exploit it. If there are high severity vulnerabilities, usually you'll be able to find ways to exploit it. So if you're interested, you can see whether you can use that exploit on your own code base. Hopefully you'll have a security department that is able to evaluate those things and help you make a more educated guess on whether you should or shouldn't update. But when in doubt, I prefer to just update because I'd rather get rid of that known vulnerability than be potentially at risk for an exploit, even if no known exploit is out there yet. I think we're done. Thank you. Thanks again.